imagine for a second right now that you are walking through a house. And I mean, it's a house you know perfectly. You know exactly which floorboards in the hallway creak when you step on them. You know how the afternoon light, catches the dust motes in the kitchen.
Yeah, you know the exact angle you have to jiggle the front door handle to get it to actually lock.
Exactly. You are just entirely comfortable there. But then, say, one random Tuesday, you just stop dead in the middle of the living room and look around, and this really startling realization just sort of hits you. You didn't pick the paint colors on these walls. You didn't choose the furniture. You didn't even, draw up the floor plan.
You just sort of moved in.
Right. You just moved in day by day, year by year, and you adapted your entire existence to fit a structure you didn't actually build. It's a house you live in, sure, but you are not the architect. You are just a tenant in your own life.
Which is, it is a profoundly heavy realization. And frankly, it is sort of the default human condition.
Yeah.
Because we are just highly adaptive creatures, right?
Yeah.
We adapt to our environment, our careers, our relationships, our daily routines, and we do it so seamlessly that we completely bypass the fundamental question of whether those structures were, ever designed to suit us in the first place.
We just take what's there.
Exactly. We inherit a blueprint from society, from our parents, from who we were in our early 20s, and we just keep living inside it long after we've completely outgrown the square footage.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are basically taking a sledgehammer to that inherited house. We are exploring a really comprehensive, almost mechanistic blueprint for personal transformation that we've extracted from our research materials today. And we are absolutely bypassing the vague, feel-good platitudes.
Right, none of the typical self-help fluff.
Exactly. We are going to deconstruct the exact cognitive and behavioral methodology required to literally reinvent your life. Because this feeling of living in a house you didn't build, this creeping sense of a disconnect between the life you're living and the life you are actually capable of living, it is just incredibly common. It's this quiet dissonance.
It is, yeah. And it's rarely this cinematic crisis. People always expect a midlife crisis to look like buying a bright red sports car or having some massive public meltdown.
Right.
But usually the actual catalyst for reinvention is just a feeling of profound stagnation.
Okay, let's unpack this, because stagnation is just the perfect word for it. It isn't necessarily about tragedy or acute misery. It's just the quiet inertia of being in a rut. You wake up, you do your commute, you manage this checklist of monotonous obligations, you scroll on a screen for a few hours, and you go to sleep.
Yeah, rinse and repeat.
Right. It feels less like an intentional journey of conscious evolution and way more like a repeating software loop.
Well, from a neurobiological perspective, that repeating software loop is quite literal. You are operating on the brain's default mode network.
Okay, wait, default mode network.
Yeah, so it requires very, very little caloric energy to run your life on autopilot, so the brain obviously favors it to conserve energy. But that feeling of stagnation, that friction you feel, is crucial. That friction is your cognitive dissonance alerting you that your intrinsic values and your daily actions are just no longer aligned.
So it's basically a biological alarm bell.
Precisely. It's an alarm forcing a shift from passive existence to active self-inquiry. It's your brain asking, hey, is this current trajectory actualizing my potential, or am I just, busy surviving the routine?
So how do we actually answer that? Because, you can't just start knocking down walls in a house without knowing which ones are load-bearing.
No, definitely not.
If you just impulsively quit your job or move to a completely new city without doing a structural inspection of your own psyche, the roof is going to collapse. So our materials outline this incredibly rigorous internal audit as the mandatory first step. We have to excavate the core self.
Because any life architecture that's built on a flawed understanding of your own intrinsic drivers is just doomed to structural failure. You have to bypass what society tells you to value or what your parents told you to value and drill down to your actual baseline psychological drivers.
Right.
And the audit provides a diagnostic framework to do this, starting with identifying your states of flow.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics of that, because the first major diagnostic question here is, what activities induce a state of flow for you? Where are you so engrossed that time itself just seems to dissolve? Yeah. And I want to know why this specifically is considered the ultimate lie detector for what we actually care about.
So, the term flow was coined by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. But let's look at what is actually physically happening in the brain when time dissolves. It is a state called transient hypofrontality.
Transient hypofrontality. Okay, break that down for me.
Sure. So transient meaning temporary, hypo meaning less, and frontality referring to the prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain responsible for self-criticism, overthinking, and tracking time, literally powers down.
It just shuts off.
Essentially, yes. It was far less active. And simultaneously, your brain is flooded with a highly specific, really potent neurochemical cocktail. You get dopamine for focus, noradrenaline for energy, anandamide for lateral thinking, and endorphins for pain relief.
Oh, wow. So you literally cannot fake a flow state.
It is entirely impossible. You cannot neurochemically force transient hypofrontality while doing a task you find meaningless or deeply agonizing.
Right, because if I hate doing taxes, I can't just trick my brain into flow.
Exactly. Your prefrontal cortex will stay highly active, constantly calculating, exactly how much time is left until you can stop. Therefore, tracking your flow states is literally tracking your pure, unfiltered, intrinsic motivation.
That makes so much sense. So if you do an audit of your week, and the only time your prefrontal cortex actually shuts down and you lose track of time is when you are, say, untangling complex data spreadsheets, or when you are building something with your hands in the garage, or when you're deep in a philosophical conversation, that is hard data.
It's the most objective data you have about yourself.
Yeah, that tells you what the foundation of your new life actually needs to look like. So you find the flow. The next logical step the source talks about is amplification. The second question asks, what elements do you need to actively amplify to align with your ideal self?
And amplification requires deliberate environmental design. Knowing what puts you in flow is pretty useless if you don't build an architecture that actually facilitates it, right?
Yeah, obviously.
It means moving from a passive hope that you'll just somehow find time for these things, to actively engineering your calendar in your physical space so that these flow activities become the path of least resistance.
But wait, this brings us to the third part of the audit, and here's where it gets really interesting, because I start to see a massive problem. The third question is about subtraction. What must be consciously diminished or eliminated?
Yes, the friction point.
I really want to push back on this entirely, because subtracting sounds great in a sterile laboratory, right? But in reality, isn't subtraction just like a privileged way of saying ignore your responsibilities? If I realize my middle management job doesn't give me flow, I can't just subtract it. I have a mortgage, I have kids. How does subtraction actually work when everything in your life feels structurally load-bearing?
That is the exact friction point where most transformations just die. We view subtraction as a literal threat to survival. And you are absolutely correct that you cannot always impulsively quit a job that pays the mortgage. That's a huge leap. But subtraction isn't just about massive life-altering severances.
Okay, so what is it then?
It is often about micro-pruning. Think about how we suffer from extreme cognitive load today. We accumulate totally useless meetings, draining social commitments that we only keep out of mere politeness, endless digital distractions, and these micro habits that just consume our mental bandwidth.
Yeah, we totally hoard responsibilities because we think being busy equals being important.
We do. And we also hoard them due to the sunk cost fallacy. Evolutionarily, we are wired for loss aversion. The amygdala in your brain registers the loss of a habit, a relationship, or a commitment as a threat. Even if that commitment is actively harming us, we think, well, I've spent 5 years of this PTA committee, I can't just step down now.
Right, it feels like failing.
Exactly. But if you want to amplify the activities that induce flow, you're dealing with the rigid physics of time and energy. Both are finite resources. Pruning the non-essential, whether that means setting a really strict boundary on your working hours, delegating a recurring task, or dropping a draining social circle, is the only way to create the empty space required for the essential to flourish.
It's like the physics of a crowded room. You cannot bring a gorgeous new sofa into a living room that is already packed floor to ceiling with garbage. You have to clear the floor space first.
That's a perfect analogy.
Okay, so we've run the audit. We know our flow states, we know what to amplify, and we've ruthlessly identified the cognitive clutter we need to prune. We have the what, we have the floor plan. But having a floor plan doesn't magically build a house.
No, it does not.
And this is where the materials point out a fascinating psychological trap. It's the fallacy of leaps.
Yes, the all-or-nothing fallacy. The translation from the blueprint to the actual construction is where the highest casualty rate occurs.
Because we always overcorrect. You look at your audit on a Sunday night, you feel that deep sting of stagnation we talked about, and you say, right, Tomorrow morning, everything changes. I am waking up at 4:30 a.m. I am running 6 miles. I am throwing out all the sugar in the house. I am meditating for an hour, and I will become a completely new entity.
And you feel incredible on Sunday night
Yeah.
making that plan, right?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
But by Wednesday afternoon, your alarm goes off, you are sleep deprived, your muscles ache, you eat a donut out of sheer stress, and the entire endeavor just collapses. Why does the brain do this? Why do we crave the massive leap when it literally never, ever works?
Because planning a massive revolutionary change triggers a massive release of dopamine. We get the neurochemical reward of having achieved the goal simply by fantasizing about it.
Wait, really? Just planning it gives us the reward?
Yes. But biologically, our actual physical systems violently reject sudden, massive changes. Homeostasis is the body's primary directive. When you try to overhaul your entire existence on a Monday morning, the brain's amygdala interprets this radical shift in routine not as self-improvement, but as a dangerous instability.
He thinks you're under attack.
Exactly. It triggers an acute stress response. It drains your executive function and your willpower at an astronomical rate until you're eventually forced to surrender and return to your baseline equilibrium.
Man, it's like trying to bench press 500 pounds on your first day at the gym. You aren't stimulating muscle growth. You were just inducing a catastrophic injury and ensuring you never walk back into the gym again.
Exactly. The human organism learns through adaptation to mild stress, not catastrophic shock. Which brings us to the counterintuitive antidote for this. The philosophy of marginal gains, deeply rooted in the concept of Kaizen.
Kaizen, right.
Yes. Small, continuous, almost laughably trivial improvements.
Let's ground this because I think people struggle with how small we mean. If the goal is to build physical health, the massive leap is the 500-pound bench press or the vow to run 10 miles a day. What is the exact Kaizen approach?
The Kaizen approach is committing to a 10-minute walk. Or honestly, if even that triggers resistance, committing to simply putting on your running shoes every single morning.
But hold on, how does just putting on shoes change my life? I mean, I'm not burning any calories doing that. It feels pointless.
You are not burning calories, no. But you are rewiring neural pathways. The goal of the initial action must be so exceptionally easy that it totally bypasses the amygdala's threat detection system. Putting on your shoes or walking for 10 minutes does not trigger an alarm response.
Right, doesn't scare the brain.
Exactly. It does not require massive amounts of prefrontal willpower. But what you are doing is establishing the neurological habit loop. You are myelinating the neural pathway of the routine.
Okay, myelinating. What is that?
Myelin is the fatty sheath that insulates nerve fibers in the brain. Think of it like insulation on an electrical wire. The more a pathway fires, the thicker the myelin becomes, and the faster and more automatic the electrical signal travels.
Oh, wow.
By taking an infinitesimally small step every single day, you are literally thickening the myelin of that specific behavior. It is the aggregation of marginal gains.
So doing a tiny thing 100 times is better than doing a huge thing once.
Yes. A 1% improvement compounded daily results in a completely transformed system over a year. The 10-minute walk eventually scales to a run naturally because the capacity is built alongside the habit without ever triggering a systemic rebellion.
Small steps, exponential results. But this brings up a logistical nightmare, honestly. If transformation requires 1,000 tiny steps every single day, how do I manage that cognitive load? If I have to actively remember to take my 10-minute walk and drink my water and read my 5 pages and do my gratitude journaling, my entire day is just me trying to remember my marginal gains.
Right, which sounds exhausting.
It is. I will inevitably drop the ball the second I get stressed at work.
Which is why relying on conscious memory or willpower is a fundamental design flaw. The system must be automated. The materials introduce a concept that engineers this automation by hacking the architecture you already have in place. It is called habit stacking.
I absolutely love this concept. The premise is that our lives are basically the sum of automated behaviors driven by the basal ganglia, right? We don't use willpower to brush our teeth or navigate our morning commute. We just do it.
Exactly.
So instead of trying to plant a brand new habit into the chaotic middle of your day and just hoping you remember it, you anchor the new, fragile habit to a deeply established, rock-solid existing routine.
You utilize the momentum of an unavoidable daily trigger.
Let's use reading as an example from the source material. If I want to read more, I don't just say, oh, I'll read tonight. I look at my morning. I always, without fail, make a cup of coffee. That coffee ritual is deeply myelinated, as he said, so the stack becomes immediately after I press the button on the coffee machine, I will dedicate 5 minutes to reading. The coffee machine is the trigger.
Yes, perfect example.
But I do have a question about this. So what does this all mean for us practically? Are we just trying to program ourselves like robots? If I stack 4 or 5 things onto my morning coffee, read a book, do some squats, write in a journal, doesn't this just turn my morning into a rigid robotic assembly line? Where is the joy in a life? Perfectly stacked like a factory floor.
I get that. If we connect this to the bigger picture, though, that is a really common misinterpretation of how automation actually feels in practice. It seems rigid from the outside, but internally, it is deeply liberating.
Liberating, how so?
Because when you habit stack correctly, you are offloading the mental tax of decision-making. Willpower and decision-making draw from a finite reserve of glucose in the brain. Every single choice you make, no matter how small, depletes it. By the time 7 p.m. rolls around, you suffer from decision fatigue, which is exactly why you watch television instead of reading.
Oh, that makes sense.
By anchoring the reading to the coffee, the decision is entirely removed. The existing habit acts as a cognitive trigger. It seamlessly integrates the new action into your day without requiring massive amounts of willpower. It happens instinctively. You aren't operating like a robot. You are actually freeing up your executive function to focus on the things that really matter. The flow states, the creative problem solving, the complex relationships.
So you are basically sneaking the new behavior past your own resistance. The trigger just does all the heavy lifting.
Exactly. It engineers a foolproof system where the new behavior eventually becomes just as automatic as making the coffee.
Okay, but let's look at the failure state of this. A great habit system is like a perfectly coded piece of software. You can stack the habits beautifully. But if the hardware you are running it on is corrupted, the whole system crashes. And the materials identify this hardware as your internal operating system, your mindset, and your environment.
The cognitive framework, yes. Because you can implement every marginal gain in habit stack perfectly. But if your internal narrative is fundamentally misaligned, you will subconsciously sabotage the whole process. The cascade effect here is absolute. Thoughts dictate actions. Actions forge habits, and habits architect reality.
Let's break down that internal narrative, because the dichotomy presented in the text is between the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. And I don't want to just gloss over these as corporate buzzwords. When we are stuck in that rut of stagnation we talked about at the beginning, the fixed mindset is usually driving the bus. What does that actually look like on a neurobiological level when we encounter friction?
Well, the fixed mindset is the subconscious belief that your attributes, like your intelligence, your talent, your character, are static and basically carved in stone.
Like you get what you get.
Exactly. So when a person with a fixed mindset encounters failure, their internal monologue does not say, I failed at this specific task. It says, I am a failure. It equates a lack of immediate proficiency with a permanent biological defect.
Nice.
And this triggers massive ego protection mechanisms. If trying a new habit and failing means you are fundamentally flawed, your brain is going to protect you by ensuring you never try anything new ever again. It generates apathy and cynicism as literal defense mechanisms.
Wow, it's an instruction manual for stagnation. You hit a wall, you say, I'm not built for this, and quitting becomes the deeply myelinated habit.
Exactly.
The growth mindset, conversely, separates your identity from your proficiency.
Right.
It views current abilities as merely a starting point that can be altered through neuroplasticity and effort.
Yes, and there's a remarkably simple linguistic intervention that the materials highlight to force this shift. It is a tactical application of the word yet.
Right, so instead of the internal monologue stating, I can't comprehend this financial data, which is a fixed terminal sentence, you intercept it and append the word, I can't comprehend this financial data yet.
Just that one word.
But it feels almost too simple, though. Does adding one single word actually change the brain's processing? I mean, really?
It absolutely does. Language deeply shapes cognition. In linguistics, this relates to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, but practically speaking, the word yet acts as a cognitive interrupt.
A cognitive interrupt?
Yes. It stops the brain from finalizing a permanent negative judgment. It introduces a temporal gap. It signals to the prefrontal cortex that the current state of inability is temporary, thereby leaving the neural pathways open to future learning rather than shutting them down in defeat. It maintains engagement.
That is fascinating. But the operating system isn't just a closed loop inside our own skulls, is it? We're constantly downloading code from the outside world. The blueprint pivots heavily here into the concept of the external environment, invoking that classic Jim Rohn idea that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Social contagion. It is one of the most powerful and, frankly, invisible forces acting upon your architecture.
Let's drill into the biology of social contagion. We talk about catching an attitude like catching a cold. How does being around negative or complacent people actually dismantle a growth mindset, like mechanically? What is happening?
It operates through the mirror neuron system in the brain. Mirror neurons fire both when you act and when you observe the same action performed by another person. We are evolutionarily designed to synchronize with our tribe for survival.
Because if the tribe runs, you should probably run.
Exactly. So we passively and continuously absorb the emotional states, the vocabulary, the ambitions, and the limitations of our social milieu. If you are deliberately trying to implement marginal gains, but your primary social circle constantly engages in fixed mindset, complaining, cynicism, and mockery of ambition, well, your mirror neurons are constantly firing in a state of negativity.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. The sheer cognitive load required to resist that emotional contagion will eventually deplete your willpower. You will subconsciously lower your standards just to maintain social harmony.
But this requires a massive reality check, honestly. It's very easy for a book or a deep dive like this to say, cut out toxic people, curate your top 5. But in reality, we can't just delete our friends. One of those 5 people might be your mother, or your direct manager, or your spouse who is currently struggling. How do we handle this in the real world without becoming isolated sociopaths?
That is a very valid point. And the key term used in the blueprint is consciously curating, not necessarily eliminating. You manage the exposure and you balance the scales. If you have a direct manager who is steeped in a fixed mindset, you must establish rigorous internal boundaries. You recognize their behavior as a symptom of their own operating system, not an objective reality that you need to absorb. You limit engagement where possible.
You essentially put up a cognitive firewall.
A firewall, exactly. But more importantly, you must aggressively balance the scales. If your physical environment is a net negative, you must actively inject high-voltage inspiration into your ecosystem. Your 5 people do not have to be physically present in the room with you.
And that is a massive paradigm shift.
It changes everything. Parasocial relationships are highly effective for mirror neuron activation. A deceased philosopher you read every morning can be one of your 5. An expert whose deep dives you listen to while commuting can be one of your 5. An online community of practitioners can be your milieu. You have to actively curate the information and the energy you consume to counteract the passive negativity you might inevitably encounter in your physical world.
You build a digital and literary cabinet of advisors to override the local noise. I love that. Okay, so let's review. We've run the internal audit. We know our flow states. We are utilizing Kaizen for marginal gains. We've automated them with habit stacking. We have installed the growth mindset operating system and curated our inputs. The structure is built.
It sounds perfect on paper.
But, and this is the moment every single listener has experienced, you are inevitably going to mess up. You will get sick. You will have a crisis at work. You will miss your habit stack for 3 days in a row. The diet will break. The reading will stop. The stagnation will creep back in. How a person handles that specific point of failure determines the fate of the entire architectural project. Which brings us to the concept of the inevitable stumble and cultivating anti-fragility.
Yes. The blueprint assumes failure as a structural necessity. The problem is that when we experience a lapse, the fixed mindset immediately attempts a hostile takeover. We experience what psychologists call the abstinence violation effect, often referred to as the what the hell effect.
Oh, I know this one intimately. You eat 1 piece of chocolate on a Tuesday and your brain says, well, the diet is ruined. What the hell? I might as well eat the entire cake and try again next month.
Precisely. You catastrophize a single data point. You turn a minor behavioral lapse into a total verdict on your entire character. The critical pivot required here is learning to decouple the emotion from the failure. A lapse must be reframed simply as raw, neutral data.
Just data, not a judgment.
Just valuable data for your next attempt. So if you miss your morning reading habit, you don't say, I'm a lazy failure. You say, interesting, the system failed. Why?
You become a scientist of your own behavior.
Exactly. You analyze the variables. Was the cue not visible enough? Was I sleep deprived, reducing my executive function? You use the data to recalibrate the habit stack. This objective analysis is the gateway to a concept that goes far beyond mere resilience. It is the concept of anti-fragility.
We need to spend significant time here. Anti-fragility is a term popularized by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and it completely alters how we view stress and failure. Because most people just want to be resilient. Why isn't resilience enough?
Think of the physical properties of objects. A fragile object, like a glass vase, shatters when exposed to stress. A resilient or robust object, like a solid block of iron, withstands the stress. You hit it with a hammer, and it stays exactly the same. It survives, but it does not improve.
Right.
Anti-fragility describes a system that actually requires stress, volatility, and failure to grow stronger.
So it's not just bouncing back, it is bouncing back stronger, specifically because of the impact.
Yes. Biological systems are inherently anti-fragile. Consider your muscular system or your skeletal system. When you lift heavy weights, you are literally causing micro-tears in the muscle fibers. You're damaging the system. But the body overcompensates during the repair process, making the muscle larger and stronger to handle future stress. The stress is the required mechanism for growth.
The blueprint uses this really powerful analogy of a baby learning to walk to illustrate this psychological anti-fragility. And honestly, it's a trope we hear constantly in personal development, right? Fall down 7 times, stand up 8. But let's look at the actual mechanism of why the baby is the perfect anti-fragile system. When a toddler stands up, takes a step, and immediately collapses, they don't sit on the carpet, experience the abstinence violation effect, and conclude they are genetically unfit for bipedal movement.
No, they don't. They lack the ego attachment to the failure. They process the fall purely as proprioceptive data. Their vestibular system and cerebellum instantly analyze the failure. Okay, center of gravity was too far forward, and they adjust the muscular tension for the next attempt.
There's zero self-judgment, only a relentless drive forward.
Exactly. The system becomes structurally sounder, specifically because it incorporated the data from the fall.
And the tragic irony here is that we look at that toddler, and we afford them immense compassion. We cheer for the wobble. We applaud the failure because we recognize it as the necessary mechanism of learning. But when we adults attempt to architect a new life, when we take our first wobbly steps toward a new habit or mindset, we completely deny ourselves that exact same compassion. We are incredibly brutal to ourselves. We expect immediate, robust perfection.
As we develop, our ego attaches to our performance to protect our social standing. We forget that learning a new cognitive architecture is neurologically identical to learning how to walk. It requires clumsiness.
Clumsiness is mandatory.
It is. If you demand perfection, you remain fragile. You shatter at the first lapse. If you cultivate an anti-fragile mindset, you treat yourself with the compassion required to process the failure as data, adjust your center of gravity, and take the next step.
You have to build a system that eats failure for breakfast. Okay, so we have the foundation of the audit, the framing of Kaizen, the electrical wiring of habit stacks, the operating system of the growth mindset, and the structural integrity of anti-fragility.
A solid house.
But a house doesn't maintain itself. Dust settles. Pipes leak. Entropy is a universal law. To maintain this anti-fragile mindset and keep the entire system running, we need daily maintenance. Let's look at the daily blueprint. The materials ground all these high-level philosophical concepts into 5 actionable daily rituals, plus a set of cognitive tools. Let's dig into the physiological why behind each of these 5 practices, starting with the daily gratitude practice. Specifically, noting 3 distinct things you are thankful for. I'll be honest, gratitude journals can feel incredibly cliche. Why is this structurally mandatory?
It feels cliche until you understand the neurology of the reticular activating system, or RAS.
The RAS, okay.
Your brain processes millions of bits of sensory data every single second. The RAS is the filter that determines what information actually gets sent to your conscious mind. Because of our evolutionary negativity bias, our RAS is factory programmed to scan the environment for threats, scarcity, and what is wrong. This kept our ancestors alive, but today, it causes chronic cortisol release and that feeling of stagnation.
We are wired to see the tiger in the bushes, not the beautiful sunset.
Exactly. When you force yourself to physically write down 3 specific, novel things you are grateful for every day, you are actively reprogramming the algorithm of your RAS. You are forcing the brain to scan the environment for positive data points. Over time, through neuroplasticity, the brain begins to automatically filter for opportunity, abundance, and progress rather than purely threat. It literally neurologically rewires the brain to change the visual and cognitive lens through which you experience reality.
You are hacking the search engine of your own brain. Okay, maintenance practice number 2, deliberate physical movement. We all know exercise is good for us, but the blueprint positions this not just for cardiovascular health, but as a powerful, immediate mood and energy regulator. How does moving the body fix the mind when we hit a wall?
When you feel that heavy inertia or a depressive slump, you often cannot outthink the problem. Your prefrontal cortex is clouded. Deliberate physical movement is a biological override switch. Even 20 minutes of elevated heart rate releases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF.
BDNF, I've heard of that.
Yes. BDNF is often described as miracle grow for the brain. It promotes the survival of existing neurons and encourages the growth of new synapses. Furthermore, movement flushes the system with endorphins and accelerates the clearance of stress hormones like cortisol from the bloodstream. It resets the chemical state of your hardware, which immediately alters the quality of the software as your thoughts.
You change the chemistry to change the psychology. That's brilliant. Maintenance practice number 3. Novel learning. Dedicating just 5 minutes a day to learning something entirely outside your normal scope. This ties right back to Kaizen, doesn't it?
It does. The brain constantly craves novelty to stimulate neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons, particularly in the hippocampus, the center of learning and memory. If you only ever do what you already know, your neural pathways become rigid. By spending just 5 minutes a day engaging with a new language, a new philosophical concept, or a new skill, you are forcing the brain to remain plastic and adaptable. It compounds into massive knowledge over a year, but daily it is proof to your own subconscious that your abilities are not fixed.
And 5 minutes is small enough to bypass the amygdala. Practice number 4. Restorative rest. This feels like a really relatable reminder that you simply cannot operate a high-level system on an empty tank. We treat sleep as a luxury or a sign of weakness. High achievers love to brag about functioning on 4 hours of sleep. Why does the architecture crumble without rest?
Because willpower, executive function, and emotional regulation are biologically expensive. During deep sleep, the brain literally shrinks slightly to allow cerebrospinal fluid to wash away metabolic waste products, like beta-amyloid plaques, that accumulate during waking hours. This is the glymphatic system at work. If you skip restorative rest, you're operating a complex machine bathed in toxic waste.
Wow.
Your amygdala becomes hyperreactive, meaning you are more irritable and prone to the fixed mindset, and your prefrontal cortex is severely impaired, meaning your habit stacks will instantly dissolve. Rest is not a reward for doing the work. It is the biological prerequisite for neuroplasticity. The structural changes in the brain literally occur while you are sleeping.
So sleep is when the concrete actually dries on the foundation. And finally, practice number 5. Self-compassion. Speaking to yourself with the same encouragement you would offer a dear friend, which ties back to the baby walking analogy. But is there a biological reason for self-compassion, or is it just about being nice to ourselves?
There's a profound biological reason. Harsh self-criticism triggers the mammalian threat defense system. When you berate yourself for failing a habit, your amygdala registers that self-attack as a literal threat, spiking cortisol and adrenaline. High cortisol shuts down the learning centers of the brain. You literally cannot learn from your mistake because your brain is in fight or flight mode. Self-compassion, on the other hand, activates the mammalian caregiving system, releasing oxytocin and down-regulating cortisol. This keeps the prefrontal cortex online, allowing you to objectively analyze the data of your failure and adjust the blueprint.
Brutalizing yourself literally makes you biologically stupider and less capable of change. That's a massive insight. So those are the 5 daily physiological maintenance practices: gratitude, movement, novel learning, rest, and self-compassion. But the blueprint also equips us with a set of cognitive tools, 5 specific affirmations. And I want to introduce these carefully because they aren't just cheesy phrases.
No, they are absolutely cognitive tools to reshape your perspective. They are designed to overwrite the deeply myelinated fixed mindset scripts that play automatically in your head.
Let's read through the 5 statements because they encapsulate the entire architecture we've discussed today. First, I am the architect of my own life. Second, incremental progress culminates in exponential results. Third, setbacks are setups for comebacks. Fourth, I'm committed to my own evolution. Fifth, I embrace a growth mindset in all my endeavors. When we look at these, how are we supposed to use them practically?
This raises an important question. I would pose a challenge to anyone listening right now. Notice your internal, physical, and emotional reaction to each one. Which one of those statements feels the most uncomfortable or difficult to believe right now? Which one triggers a spike of cynicism, a roll of the eyes, or a deep feeling of, that's a lie?
The resistance.
Exactly. Pay attention to the resistance. Because the friction points directly to where your growth lies. It points to the compromised load-bearing walls in your current architecture. If the phrase incremental progress culminates in exponential result makes you roll your eyes, it means your all-or-nothing fallacy is still dominating your operating system. If setbacks or setups for comebacks feels like toxic positivity to you, it indicates that your fear of failure is still running the show. The affirmation that feels the most difficult to accept is the precise cognitive tool you need to deploy the most aggressively.
You use the discomfort as a compass. You look for the pain point and you aim the tool right at it. We have covered a monumental amount of ground today. We started with the jarring realization of waking up in a life you didn't consciously build. We explored how to run a ruthless internal audit to find those transient hypofrontal flow states. We dismantled the all-or-nothing fallacy and replaced it with Kaizen. We learned to automate with habit stacking. We upgraded the operating system with a growth mindset. We embraced the physics of anti-fragility. And finally, we locked it all in with a daily neurobiological maintenance routine. It is a complete systemic architectural blueprint. But the single thread running through every single piece of this, the absolute core of the entire endeavor, is intentionality.
Intentionality is the dividing line. It is the conscious daily decision to override the default mode network, to stop being a passive tenant sleepwalking through your circumstances, and to assume the massive, terrifying, but ultimately liberating responsibility of being the active architect of your reality.
And if staring at this entire blueprint feels overwhelming, remember the neuroscience of Kaizen. The brain changes one tiny myelinated pathway at a time. The journey of 1,000 miles physically alters your neurochemistry with the very first step.
And honestly, consider the action you are taking right this second. Simply by engaging with this deep dive, by striving to learn and improve, you've already bypassed the amygdala's resistance. You've already taken the first step on that journey. You're already on the path. You started pouring the foundation.
You are already in motion. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final, unscripted thought to mull over. We have talked for the last hour about being the architect of your life, about designing the floor plan, stacking the bricks, and building the ultimate house. But what happens when the building is finished? Or is personal transformation inherently an infinite game, a blueprint that is constantly being redrawn as you discover entirely new horizons of your own potential?
An endless renaissance, the ultimate anti-fragile existence. That's a truly profound paradigm to carry forward.
Thank you for your time, your focus, and your relentless curiosity today. Keep questioning the floorboards, keep pruning the dead branches, and keep architecting. Goodbye.
Imagine spending 10 years of your life, right? Just sacrificing your weekends, ignoring your family, and basically burning the midnight oil to become the absolute top 1% in your field.
Right. The hyper specialist.
Exactly. You're this undisputed technical master. You know every single line of code or, every design principle or every legal precedent out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you walk into the office one morning and you realize that the person who just got promoted over you, the person who's now sitting in the corner office as your boss, is only pretty good at the technical stuff.
Yeah, they aren't the genius you are.
No, not at all. But they know how to command a room, right? They can tell a great story that actually captivates the clients, and they can write a persuasive email that gets funding.
It's a devastating realization for the specialist, and honestly, it happens every single day.
It really does.
You see it in corporate environments, in creative fields, everywhere. The person who spent a decade building this singular, hyper-focused skill just watches as someone with a broader, maybe seemingly less impressive toolkit walks away with all the leverage.
It's wild. And today, we are unpacking exactly why society's standard advice to specialize, to find your one true calling and put blinders onto everything else is actually setting you up for incredible fragility.
Absolutely.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are so thrilled you're here with us because the material you sent over for us to analyze today, which focuses on this concept of strategic life execution, it tackles this exact dilemma.
And what makes the specific exploration so compelling is that, we're operating on a bit of an assumption about you, the listener.
Right.
We're assuming you've already done the quiet, introspective work. Like you have dialed in your mindset, you've curated your mental environment, you already possess the internal blueprint.
Yes, the blueprint is there. And okay, let's unpack this because having a blueprint is, it's comfortable, isn't it?
Oh, it's incredibly comfortable. It's a theoretical, safe space.
Yeah.
You can just continuously adjust your goals in that space, read another self-help book, visualize your success, all without ever encountering real-world friction.
But the true challenge, and really the whole mission of our deep dive today, is figuring out how you translate all that internal recalibration into a concrete external reality.
Exactly. It's about how you stop planning and start actually pouring the concrete for the superstructure of your life.
Because there is a massive difference between just being a different person internally and actually doing differently out there in the physical world.
Mm-hmm. That transition from potential energy to kinetic energy, that is exactly where most people freeze.
Totally. Because the blueprint is perfect,
Sure.
right? But the actual construction site is messy. You step out into the world and suddenly your perfect plan has to contend with like weather and gravity and other people.
Right, the real world pushes back.
So if we're building this massive superstructure, we need a way to organize it so we don't just, pour all our effort into one giant pillar that eventually gets top-heavy, tips over, and crushes us. We need a framework.
And the material provides a really fascinating, highly effective conceptual model for this. They call it the portfolio approach.
The portfolio approach. Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, think of it through a strict financial lens. Any competent wealth manager is going to tell you that putting all of your capital, like every single cent you own, into one highly volatile stock is just a recipe for catastrophic ruin.
Oh, yeah. That's Finance 101.
Right. You need a diversified portfolio across different asset classes to weather the market fluctuations. We understand this intuitively with money. But the crazy thing is, we rarely apply that same logic to the allocation of our life's energy.
Wow. We do the exact opposite, don't we?
You really do.
We take 100% of our identity, our time, our emotional bandwidth, and we just dump it all into the career stock. We assume that if we just get the promotion or, if the startup gets funded, everything else will magically fall into place.
But if that single stock tank, say you get laid off, or your whole industry shifts, or you just fundamentally burn out your entire life, superstructure collapses.
Because there are no other pillars holding you up.
Precisely. You lose your foundational stability completely.
That is terrifying.
So to prevent that collapse, the text argues that a well-constructed life requires a balanced portfolio across 3 core domains. And we're going to analyze these today as vocation, network, and vitality.
Vocation, network, and vitality. I love that phrasing. It really elevates the basic concepts of like your job, your friends, and your health into these strategic interconnected systems.
It does. It gives them weight.
So let's focus on that first pillar, vocation. Because a vocation is fundamentally different from a job, right?
Very different, yeah.
A job is just a transactional mechanism to keep the lights on. You're trading hours for dollars.
Right.
But the material defines vocation as this precise intersection.
Right. The intersection of your intrinsic passions, your honed competencies, and what the market actually values and is willing to compensate you for.
Finding that intersection feels like step 1. But the execution phase, like how you actually make yourself irreplaceable once you're in that intersection, is where we find this concept of skill stacking.
Yes, skill stacking. And this brings us right back to your opening scenario about the hyper-specialist losing out to the generalist.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
Because this whole skill stacking idea, it feels like it flies in the face of literally everything we are taught.
I know, it really does counter the mainstream narrative.
Right. Like every guidance counselor, every productivity guru out there talks about the 10,000-hour rule. We are constantly told to pick one thing, lock ourselves in a room, and practice until we are the absolute best in the world.
The singular obsession model.
Yeah. If I am a graphic designer and I suddenly start spending 2 hours a day learning copywriting instead of, mastering the newest design software, I feel like I'm diluting my core value.
Okay.
Doesn't the market ultimately just reward the absolute best?
Well, the market rewards unique value, not necessarily singular perfection. Let's actually look at the mathematical reality of trying to be the absolute best at one thing.
Okay, what's on the numbers?
If you decide you want to be the #1 graphic designer in the world, the statistical odds are just astronomically against you. You are competing against millions of brilliant, obsessive creatives all over the globe.
It's a crowded field.
Incredibly crowded. Achieving that top 0.001% requires a level of sacrifice and, frankly, a genetic predisposition that borders on the pathological.
Wow.
And worse, if you fall short and end up in, say, the top 10%, you are still just competing in a massive sea of highly talented designers. You're basically a commodity at that point.
You're just another incredible designer waiting for someone to pick your portfolio out of a stack of 500 identical, amazing portfolios.
Exactly. But skill stacking bypasses that brutal competition entirely.
How so?
Because it is not about being a jack of all trades and a master of none. It is about aiming to be highly proficient. Specifically, the text says, the top 25% in 2 or more complementary skills.
Okay, top 25%. That feels way more doable.
Right. Reaching the top quartile in any given skill takes dedicated effort, obviously, but it is entirely achievable for a disciplined person. You do not have to be a once-in-a-generation talent. You just have to be consistently very good.
I think about this like designing vehicles.
Oh, I like this analogy. Go ahead.
So a Formula One racing car is the result of thousands of hours of specialized engineering for one single purpose, right? going unimaginably fast on a perfectly smooth paved track.
Right.
It is the absolute pinnacle of that one domain. But if you take that multi-million-dollar Formula One car and force it to drive over a speed bump in a grocery store parking lot, the undercarriage just shatters.
It's completely destroyed.
Yeah. It is utterly useless outside of its highly specific protected environment.
It's incredibly fragile to environmental changes.
Contrast that with a high-end luxury SUV. Now, the SUV will never beat the Formula One car on a pristine racetrack. It isn't the absolute fastest in the world, but it sits in the top 25% of speed. It is also in the top 25% of off-road capability, the top 25% of cargo space, and the top 25% of passenger comfort.
I see where you're going with this.
By stacking those complementary proficiencies, the SUV becomes incredibly versatile. It holds massive value in almost any terrain or weather condition. Skill stacking is essentially about building the luxury SUV of a career.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Let's actually apply that SUV framework to a real-world vocation from the source material.
Let's do it.
Consider a mid-level software developer. They are in the top 25% of coders. They're solid, reliable, but they're not the singular genius who is going to invent a brand new programming language.
Right. They're not the 0.001%.
Exactly. Now, if they just keep coding, their career trajectory is a slow, grinding climb up a very crowded ladder. But suppose they decide to stack a second skill. Let's say public speaking.
Oh, public speaking for a coder. That's rare.
Very rare. They dedicate time to Toastmasters. They learn how to project confidence, how to structure a narrative, because most people are terrified of public speaking. Merely becoming competent and comfortable puts them in the top quartile relatively quickly.
Makes sense. The bar for entry isn't impossibly high if everyone else is scared of it. So now they have 2 upper quartile skills.
Right. And then they stack a third, persuasive business writing.
Oh.
Not just writing clean code, but writing memos, grant proposals, or client pitches that clearly articulate the business value of the software. Now, calculate the statistical probability of a single individual being in the top 25% of coding, and the top 25% of public speaking, and the top 25% of business writing. The
overlap in that Venn diagram is microscopic. You've suddenly created a total unicorn.
You have engineered irreplaceability.
Yes.
That skill-stacked individual is the one who can sit down with an angry client, de-escalate the situation through clear communication, write up a new scope of work, and then go back to their desk and code the actual solution.
They can lead entire teams because they understand the technical realities, but they can also articulate the broader vision to the stakeholders.
Exactly. They become infinitely more valuable to an organization or even as an independent entrepreneur than the hyper-specialized coder who can only communicate with a machine.
That fundamentally shifts how I view professional development. It completely relieves the crushing pressure of needing to be a singular prodigy.
It's very liberating, isn't it?
It really is. Because if I'm that graphic designer we talked about, learning copywriting doesn't mean I am abandoning design. It means I can design the visual ad A&D, write the psychological hook that makes someone click it.
Right, you become a one-person powerhouse.
I become an entire marketing agency contained within one human being. It allows you to bring your multifaceted interest into your vocation rather than chopping off parts of your personality just to fit into a corporate box.
It turns your natural curiosity into a compounding asset.
So we have built this incredibly versatile, durable vehicle for our career. We have our vocation pillar poured and setting. But, a vehicle is useless if you are stuck in gridlock traffic behind people who are perfectly content driving 10 miles an hour.
That is a harsh reality.
Who you allow on the road with you dictates how fast you can actually travel. Which brings us to the second pillar of the superstructure. Your network.
The material really challenges us here. It asks us to elevate our concept of social connection from just passive friendships, people we associate with, merely due to geographic proximity or shared history, to an active, intentional curation of a personal board of directors.
A personal board of directors. I have to admit, calling your friends a board of directors sounds a bit cold.
It does sound a bit corporate.
Yeah, almost transactional at first glance. But the underlying utility of it is profound.
Well, think about why a corporate board exists. It's assembled to provide diverse perspectives, hold the CEO accountable, and guide the company through its blind spots.
Right.
Doing that for your own life requires actively recruiting specific archetypes. And the tech starts with mentors. These are the people who have already traversed the terrain you are currently navigating. They hold the map.
But how do you actually acquire a mentor without it feeling like a parasitic relationship? Like, you can't just walk up to a senior vice president at a conference and say, "Hi, please give me all your wisdom for free."
You certainly cannot approach it as a transaction of taking. That's a surefire way to get ignored.
So what's the strategy?
The most effective way to engage a mentor is through demonstrating applied curiosity. You do not ask them broad, unanswerable questions like, "Hey, how do I become successful?"
Oh, I bet they hate that.
They despise it. Instead, you do the work beforehand. You approach them with a highly specific problem, outline the 3 solutions you have already attempted, and ask for their insight on a nuanced detail.
Okay, so you show them you're already in the arena.
Exactly. And when they offer advice, the critical step, and this is where almost everyone fails, is to immediately implement it and then report back to them with the results.
Fallout.
Mentors invest in individuals who provide them with a return on their intellectual investment, which in this context is the satisfaction of seeing their wisdom effectively utilized.
That makes total sense. You are offering them the psychological reward of impact. They want to know they actually helped.
Precisely.
So alongside the mentors, you obviously need peers. These are your contemporaries, the people in the trenches with you right now. You need them for real-time collaboration, to vent frustrations that only someone at your current level can truly understand, and to share resources. But the third category for this board of directors is the one that really challenges conventional networking logic.
You're talking about mentees.
Yes, mentees. It seems counterproductive on the surface.
What's fascinating here is that the inclusion of mentees is perhaps the most powerful cognitive tool in this entire framework.
But why? If I am trying to build a massive life superstructure, my time is my most precious commodity. Why would I allocate scarce hours on my board of directors to someone who is several steps behind me? They can't open doors for me or offer high-level strategic advice. Traditional networking is entirely focused on managing up.
It is, but it ignores the cognitive mechanics of teaching. This is a phenomenon often referred to in educational psychology as the protege effect, or sometimes the Feynman technique.
Okay, break that down for me.
When you consume information, when you read a book or listen to a mentor, you often experience the illusion of competence. You nod along, assuming you understand the complexity because it makes perfect sense in your head.
Oh, I do that all the time. I read a business book and think, yep, I'm a genius now.
We all do it. But when you are forced to articulate that concept to someone who does not possess your foundational knowledge, you cannot rely on industry jargon or assumed mental leaps. You have to deconstruct the concept to its atomic parts.
You have to build the bridge for them. And I guess in doing so, you discover if your own bridge is missing any planks.
Exactly. If you attempt to explain a new business strategy or a philosophical framework to your mentee, and they look at you with blank confusion, it immediately exposes the hidden gaps in your own comprehension.
Right.
Teaching forces you to synthesize, organize, and clarify your thoughts. By actively mentoring someone, you are rigorously pressure testing the structural integrity of your own knowledge. They gain the benefit of your experience, sure, but you gain absolute mastery over your own material. You realize you didn't truly know it until you could teach it to a beginner.
So you have this incredibly dynamic ecosystem happening. You are drawing wisdom down from your mentors, you're collaborating laterally with your peers, and you're crystallizing your knowledge by passing it down to your mentees.
It's a continuous loop of growth.
You are evolving, you are leveling up. But this introduces a very thorny, painful reality that the material addresses head on. So what does this all mean for my current friend group?
Yes, the friction of growth.
Yeah. What happens to the people who are not on the board? What happens to your old college roommates, your hometown friends, the people you've been grabbing drinks with every Friday for a decade? Because let's be honest, personal growth is rarely a universally celebrated event in your old circles.
No, it's really not. When you change, the people around you often push back, and they will almost certainly push back.
Why is that? Are they just jealous?
It's rarely born of malice or overt jealousy. It's actually a manifestation of social homeostasis.
Homeostasis. Like how the human body shivers to generate heat or sweats to cool down, right? Constantly fighting to maintain that baseline temperature of 98.6 degrees.
The exact same mechanism applies to social systems. A family unit, a friend group, or even a corporate department is a system that craves equilibrium.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Over time, a group establishes unspoken rules, shared habits, and a mutual, often subconscious understanding of everyone's place in the hierarchy. When you begin to aggressively execute this life transformation.
Like when you stop going to the bar on Friday nights because you need to wake up at 5 a.m. to stack a new skill.
Exactly. Or when you start setting strict boundaries around your time, you are unilaterally changing the rules of the ecosystem. You are raising the temperature.
And the system is going to try to switch you back down to normal.
It has to survive in its current form.
It's the classic crab bucket mentality. One crab tries to climb out of the bucket and the others just reach up and pull it right back down into the pile.
That's a vivid way to picture it.
But it rarely looks like outright sabotage, does it?
Yeah.
It's usually subtle. It's those passive-aggressive comments, "Oh, you're too good for us now," or "Come on, one night of drinking won't ruin your little project." They disguise their discomfort as concern or camaraderie.
Because your evolution holds up an uncomfortable mirror to their stagnation. If you prove that it is actually possible to wake up early, learn a new skill, and change your life trajectory, it strips away the excuses they have been using to justify their own complacency.
That is profound. By succeeding, you are inadvertently making them feel bad about not trying.
Exactly. Humans deeply resent having their unexamined lives challenged, so the system acts to neutralize the threat by pulling you back into the established norm.
So how do we handle this? Because the immediate temptation when you discover a powerful new framework for living is to become an evangelist.
Oh, the urge to preach is so strong.
You want to save your friends. You want to shake them and say, "Stop wasting your time. Look at this incredible blueprint I found. We can all build superstructures together."
Evangelism is the worst possible strategy in this scenario.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
It triggers immediate, intense defensiveness. If you attempt to preach your new lifestyle to a friend group operating in homeostasis, they won't hear it as helpful advice. They will hear it as a direct attack on their core identity.
Right, because you're essentially telling them their way of living is wrong.
They will fight you not because they disagree with the logic of waking up early, but because they are defending their right to their current existence. The material advises a strategy of quiet confidence instead.
Quiet confidence.
Yeah.
What does the tactical application of that actually look like when you're facing down a group of friends trying to guilt trip you into staying out late?
It requires setting impenetrable boundaries without offering unsolicited justifications. When you decline an invitation that conflicts with your vocational goals, you do not launch into a 20-minute lecture about your new biooptimization protocol or your lead measures.
You don't try to explain the whole system?
No, you simply say, "I have a prior commitment to myself tomorrow morning, so I can't make it tonight." You remove the oxygen from the debate. You let your sustained long-term results speak louder than any argument you could possibly have in a bar.
Wow. No is a complete sentence.
It is.
But even with quiet confidence, we have to acknowledge the emotional toll this takes. It requires a tremendous amount of emotional intelligence to accept that as you build this new life, relational dynamics will inevitably fracture.
It requires grieving the loss of an era, honestly. You have to swallow the difficult truth that some relationships are foundational to your future, while others were merely scaffolding for a previous version of yourself.
Scaffolding for a previous version of yourself, that is powerful.
And it is entirely acceptable to let that scaffolding fall away. You do not always need a dramatic bridge-burning confrontation. You can simply allow the natural distance to grow.
Even if it feels terrible at first.
It will feel like a betrayal of your history. But refusing to outgrow people out of a sense of misplaced loyalty is a betrayal of your own potential.
That is a heavy but incredibly necessary realization. Okay, so we have the versatile vehicle of our vocation. We have curated the passengers in our network and navigated the toll booths of our old social circles.
We're making progress.
We are. But a vehicle, no matter how beautifully designed, is just thousands of pounds of inert metal if the engine block is cracked. If you don't have the power to actually turn the wheels, the journey just ends in the driveway.
And this leads us to the third indispensable pillar, vitality.
Yes, vitality.
The material makes it unequivocally clear that vitality is the bedrock upon which the other two pillars rest. You cannot execute a demanding, skill-stacked vocation, nor can you be a present, valuable mentor if your physical and neurological systems are chronically depleted.
But we need to be clear here. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we must move past the rudimentary magazine cover advice of, like, Eat your vegetables and try to jog.
Absolutely. The text introduces the rigorous discipline of biooptimization.
Biooptimization. It sounds clinical, almost like turning yourself into a machine. But there is a specific phrase from the text that completely reframed this for me.
Which one?
It asked, are you managing your energy or are you just managing your time? I really want to pause on that because it is a radical shift in perspective for a culture that is utterly obsessed with productivity hacks.
It's a vital distinction. We have been culturally conditioned to view time as the ultimate metric of productivity. We meticulously map our days into 15-minute increments.
We use the Pomodoro timers, we color-code our Google calendars, we download apps that lock us out of social media, we try to squeeze 26 hours of output into a 24-hour window.
But time management in a vacuum is a deeply flawed philosophy because time is a rigid, finite resource. You cannot manufacture an extra hour.
Right.
Energy, however, is elastic. Its capacity can be significantly expanded or catastrophically depleted based entirely on the inputs you provide your biological system.
Okay, give me an example of how that plays out.
Consider the reality of a scheduled block of deep work. You have perfectly managed your time, setting aside 4 uninterrupted hours on a Saturday morning to learn that new copywriting skill we talked about.
Perfect. The calendar is blocked.
But if you sit down at your desk having slept 4 hours, fueled by processed sugar, and vibrating with cortisol from unmanaged stress, those 4 hours are functionally useless.
Because the engine is sputtering.
Exactly. Your cognitive bandwidth is constrained. You will spend the entire time staring at a blinking cursor, fighting through brain fog, producing mediocre work. Time management without energy management is merely organizing your own exhaustion.
Organizing your own exhaustion. That hits hard. Yeah. So how do we optimize the engine? If it isn't just about counting calories and logging miles on a treadmill, what are the actual levers we are pulling in this biooptimization protocol?
The first and most critical lever is sleep architecture.
Sleep architecture.
This goes far beyond merely being unconscious for 8 hours. It is about understanding the stages of sleep and protecting them. Deep sleep is the biological phase where your body physically repairs tissue and clears neurotoxic waste from the brain.
Like taking out the cellular trash.
Exactly. And then there's REM sleep, or rapid eye movement. That is the neurological phase where emotional regulation occurs and where the brain physically wires new neural pathways.
Wait, this connects directly back to the vocation pillar.
It does.
If you're spending hours practicing a new skill, say, learning a complex coding language, you don't actually solidify that learning while you are staring at the screen. The brain consolidates those memories and physically builds the structural connections while you are in REM sleep. So if you cut your sleep short to squeeze in more quote-unquote productive hours, you are literally preventing your brain from saving the progress you made that day. You are working hard, but failing to physically record the results.
You are sabotaging the biological mechanism of learning itself.
That is wild. Okay, what's the next lever?
The second lever is chronobiology, which is the scientific study of biological rhythms, specifically your circadian rhythm. Biooptimization requires an honest audit of when your cognitive alertness naturally peaks.
Finding your window?
Right. Are you a morning lark whose highest executive function occurs at 7:00 a.m.? Or are you a night owl whose creative problem-solving abilities unlock at 10:00 p.m.?
And this is where so much friction happens. We read an interview with some billionaire CEO who says the secret to success is waking up at 4:30 a.m. to take an ice bath and journal.
The infamous 4:30 a.m. routine.
Yeah. So a natural night owl forces themselves to wake up at 4:30 a.m.
Yeah.
They are miserable. They spend massive amounts of willpower just keeping their eyes open, fighting against their own biochemistry. It's like trying to paddle a canoe upstream. You might make some progress, but the energy expenditure is massive.
It's completely inefficient. Biooptimization dictates that you map your most cognitively demanding tasks, your deep work, your skill stacking to your natural biological peaks. You paddle downstream with the current of your own chemistry.
Paddle downstream. I like that.
And beyond sleep and timing, the material touches on the specific biological impact of nutrition, but it frames it around fueling for peak cognitive performance rather than aesthetic body composition.
Yes, I want to dig into the jargon here for a second because the text mentions mitigating neuroinflammation and optimizing neurotransmitter production. What does that actually mean for the listener when they sit down to eat lunch?
Well, the brain is an incredibly energy-hungry organ. It consumes roughly 20% of your body's total caloric intake. What you ingest directly dictates how that engine runs. Okay.
When you consume highly processed foods or massive quantities of refined sugar, it triggers an inflammatory response in the body. This inflammation crosses the blood-brain barrier, and that is neuroinflammation.
And how does that feel in real life?
Subjectively, you experience this as brain fog. Your processing speed slows down, your focus fractures, and lethargy sets in.
You literally physically cannot execute a high-level strategy because the hardware is inflamed.
Conversely, the production of neurotransmitters, those are the chemical messengers that dictate your motivation, focus, and mood, like dopamine and serotonin that relies entirely on the availability of specific amino acids derived from the proteins and nutrients you consume.
So you can't just wish your way into being motivated.
Exactly. You cannot synthesize the neurochemicals required for intense focus out of thin air. You must provide the biological raw materials. Therefore, every meal is either an investment in your cognitive stamina or a withdrawal.
Your physical state is the literal platform upon which your professional ambition is built. If you allow the platform to rot, the superstructure will inevitably crack.
Okay, so let's look at the incredible position we are in now. We have the stacked skills making us uniquely valuable. We have the board of directors keeping us sharp, and we've successfully set boundaries with the crabs in the bucket.
The foundation is solid.
We are sleeping optimally, fueling our brains, managing our energy. The superstructure is rising. The momentum is intoxicating. But then you hit the wall.
You inevitably encounter the plateau.
The dreaded plateau. It is the most universally frustrating experience in human development. You have been doing everything right. You've been so disciplined. You saw rapid progress for months. And then suddenly, the progress line just goes flat.
It happens to everyone.
You were putting in the exact same amount of effort, maybe even more, but you stop seeing results. The weight stops dropping. The coding language stops making sense. The business revenue stalls out. What do we do when the building stops building?
The critical first step is purely cognitive. You must normalize the plateau. A plateau is not a moral failing.
It feels like one, though.
It does, but it's not. It does not indicate that you lack inherent talent, nor does it mean your blueprint was flawed. A plateau is simply mathematical proof that you have reached the absolute mechanical limits of your current methodology.
What got you here won't get you there. It's a cliche, but it's fundamentally true.
Exactly. The tools and habits that successfully navigated you from level 1 to level 5 simply lack the sophistication required to move you from level 5 to level 10.
So the plateau is a signal.
It represents a crossroads, and the material outlines 2 distinct, highly strategic paths for navigating it. Strategy 1 is deliberate practice.
Now, I want to unpack this carefully because deliberate practice sounds a lot like just try harder and put in more hours. Like, if my tennis game plateaus, I should just go hit 1,000 more tennis balls, right?
Emphatically, no. That is a very dangerous misconception. Mindless repetition of a flawed technique does not lead to mastery. It merely ingrains the flaw so deeply that it becomes permanent.
Oh.
If you hit 1,000 tennis balls with improper footwork, you have successfully mastered terrible footwork.
That makes total sense.
Deliberate practice is actually the antithesis of the flow state. Flow state feels effortless and highly enjoyable. Deliberate practice is intentionally uncomfortable, deeply frustrating, and exhausting.
Because it forces you to look at the ugliest parts of your performance.
Yes. It requires deconstructing a skill into its smallest microcomponents, isolating the exact variable where your weakness lies, and obsessively drilling that single point of failure.
So how does that apply to our skills?
If you plateau in public speaking, deliberate practice isn't just giving more speeches, it is recording yourself, realizing that you use filler words like when transitioning between slides, and spending 2 hours practicing just those transitions over and over until the neural pathway is rewritten.
It sounds painful.
It is. And it almost always requires a feedback loop, a mentor or objective data to constantly correct your deviation.
It's taking a magnifying glass to your inadequacies. That is the first path. Going infinitely deeper into the current skill. But the material offers a second strategy for the plateau, and I think this is where the real magic of lifelong growth happens. Strategy 2. The S-curve of learning.
The S-curve. It's a mathematical model adopted by performance psychologists to chart the typical trajectory of human skill acquisition and growth.
I think the best way to visualize this S-curve is to think about learning to play a musical instrument, like the guitar.
Let's hear it.
When you first pick up a guitar, you know absolutely nothing. The curve is totally flat at the bottom. But within a few weeks, you learn 3 basic chords. Suddenly, you can play 100 different pop songs.
Right. The dopamine rush is massive.
It's huge. Your progress skyrockets. You are on the steep upward vertical part of the S. You are acquiring broad knowledge incredibly fast.
This is the phase of rapid acquisition. The brain is highly stimulated by the novelty of it all.
But fast forward 5 years. You are a very good guitar player. You know all the chords, the scales, the theory. You have hit the top flat part of the S curve.
Plateau.
Exactly.
Good
To
job.
get just 1% better, say, to learn how to improvise complex jazz solos might take another 5 years of grueling, unrewarding, deliberate practice. The joy of rapid growth is gone. It has become a brutal grind.
Because you have mastered the domain and the neurochemical reward system that previously fueled your motivation has shut off, this is actually where burnout occurs.
Really, burnout happens at the top.
Yes. Burnout is rarely the result of working too hard. It is the result of working exceptionally hard on the flat part of the S-curve where there is zero corresponding reward or progression.
Wow. So what is the strategic move here? If we look at this through the lens of a role-playing video game,
Oh, I love a good gaming analogy.
when you spend 100 hours maxing out your character as a master swordsman, the game gets boring. You don't just keep swinging the sword for no experience points. You go back to the menu and you start a brand new character. You switch to being a level 1 magician.
You start over.
Yes. Suddenly, you are back at the bottom of a new S-curve. Every little spell you cast gives you massive experience points. The dopamine returns.
And crucially, in life, you do not start the new S-curve with zero experience. You carry over your foundational stats.
Right. You bring your understanding of rhythm, your calloused fingers, your discipline from the guitar, and you apply it to the piano. You learn the piano 10 times faster.
This is the strategy of jumping to an adjacent S-curve. Let's return to our software developer example.
Okay, the coder.
They have spent a decade mastering code. They're on the top flat plateau of their technical S-curve. Grinding to learn one obscure new coding language offers marginal utility and high burnout risk.
Now what do they do?
The strategic move is to take their deep technical understanding and jump to the bottom of a new curve. Product management.
They become a beginner again.
Exactly. They are a novice at managing timelines, dealing with client expectations, and handling budgets. The learning curve is steep, the challenge is fresh, and they experience rapid growth again.
But they have that massive advantage.
Right. They are a novice who possesses developer-level insight into the product. They can surf from the coding curve to the management curve, perhaps eventually even to the venture capital curve.
Surfing the curves.
The material explicitly posits that this ability to continuously recognize when you have flattened out and courageously jump to the bottom of an adjacent S-curve is the ultimate safeguard against stagnation.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
You never stop climbing. You just change the mountain. Okay, we have all these incredible high-level strategies. We are skill stacking. We are optimizing our biology. We are managing our boards. We are surfing the S-curve.
It's a lot of execution.
It is. But this brings us to the final, most practical dilemma. How do we know if any of this is actually working?
This raises an important question.
Yeah, how do we distinguish between genuine structural progress and simply being busy? We need to measure our execution, but without becoming obsessive spreadsheet managing robots.
Measurement dictates management. You can't improve what you don't measure. To track this effectively, the material introduces a fundamental distinction from organizational execution theory, the difference between lag measures and lead measures.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because understanding this difference completely alters your psychological relationship with success and failure.
It truly does.
This is where we uncover why most people spend their entire lives staring at the wrong numbers and feeling miserable.
Yeah.
So let's define the trap first. What is a lag measure?
A lag measure is the ultimate result or outcome you're attempting to achieve. In our vitality pillar, a lag measure is the number on the bathroom scale, your body fat percentage, or your resting heart rate.
Okay.
In vocation, the lag measure is the promotion, the end-of-year bonus, or the total revenue your business generated this quarter.
It's called a lag measure because it is a historical document, right?
Exactly.
By the time you receive the data, by the time you step on the scale or check the bank balance, the actions that caused that number occurred weeks or months in the past. It lags behind reality.
Yeah.
You are essentially staring in the rearview mirror.
Precisely. Lag measures are necessary for overarching direction. They tell you if you arrived at the destination. However, they possess a fatal flaw when used as daily management tools.
Which is?
They are incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to influence directly in the present moment. You cannot simply command your body to drop 5 pounds by tomorrow morning. You cannot simply decide to generate $10,000 in revenue today.
Right. If you stand in the bathroom and stare at the scale for an hour, you do not burn any calories. The scale won't move through willpower.
Staring at a lag measure only generates profound anxiety because it reminds you of the gap between where you are and where you want to be without giving you a tangible tool to close it.
So if we abandon the lag measures, where do we focus our daily attention?
We focus our obsessive attention entirely on the lead measures. A lead measure is the specific high-impact action that you have 100% direct autonomous control over.
Okay.
It is the input that predictably leads to the desired outcome. You do not control the output, but you have absolute dominion over the input.
Give me some concrete examples of inputs across our 3 pillars. Let's make this really tangible for the listener.
Let's do it. In vitality, if the uncontrollable lag measure is losing 10 pounds, the controllable lead measures might be: I will consume 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes of waking, and I will execute 45 minutes of zone 2 cardiovascular exercise.
You have total authority over whether you ingest that protein and whether you put on your shoes and move. Nobody can stop you from doing those things.
Exactly. In vocation, if the lag measure is securing a promotion, the lead measure is not hope the boss notices me.
Which is what everyone does.
Right. The actual lead measure is I will complete 2 hours of uninterrupted deep work on my stacked skill every Tuesday and Thursday, or I will initiate one 15-minute exploratory conversation with a leader in an adjacent department every single week.
I love that. And in the network pillar, if the lag measure is the subjective feeling of having a deeply connected, supportive community, what's the lead measure?
The lead measure might be, I will host one device-free dinner party per month for 3 peers and 1 mentor. You control the invitations, you control the menu, you control the environment.
You control the inputs. And the psychological shift that occurs when you pivot from lag to lead measures is profound.
It changes everything.
When you focus on lag measures, you cultivate a locus of control that is completely external. You feel like a victim of circumstance, waiting for the economy to improve, waiting for your metabolism to speed up, waiting for recognition.
It's very disempowering.
But when you anchor your daily psychology to lead measures, you return the locus of control entirely to yourself.
It is incredibly liberating. It strips the destructive emotion out of the daily grind.
You stop worrying about whether you will get the promotion or lose the weight, and you just ask yourself a binary question at the end of the day. Did I execute the lead measure? Yes or no?
Did I do the 45 minutes of deep work? Did I make the phone call?
If you ruthlessly, consistently execute the high-impact inputs, the outcomes, the lag measures, will inevitably take care of themselves. The result is just the mathematical shadow cast by your daily actions.
The building builds itself if you consistently lay the required bricks every single day.
The building builds itself if you lay the bricks. That is the perfect distillation of everything we've explored today.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have covered an immense architectural landscape today. Let's synthesize this massive framework for everyone listening.
Today to you.
We began with the realization that the internal blueprint is merely potential, right? We must build the external reality through a diversified portfolio approach, balancing our lives across 3 massive pillars to avoid catastrophic collapse.
Right. Pillar 1, vocation. We reject the fragility of hyperspecialization. We are building a versatile, all-terrain vehicle by skill stacking, aiming to be in the top 25% of a few complementary skills to engineer irreplaceability in the market.
Exactly. Pillar 2, network. We are intentionally curating a personal board of directors, actively recruiting mentors, collaborating with peers, and solidifying our own mastery by teaching mentees.
And we navigate the inevitable friction of social homeostasis with quiet confidence, setting firm boundaries and allowing relationships that no longer serve the superstructure to naturally recede.
Pillar 3, vitality, the engine block. We abandon generic advice and embrace biooptimization. We stop managing our time and start managing our energy by respecting our biological rhythms, protecting our sleep architecture, and fueling our neurology for peak cognitive output.
Yes. And when that engine stalls, when we hit the inevitable plateau, we do not panic. We recognize it as a crossroads.
We either engage in the uncomfortable, hyper-focused friction of deliberate practice to drill into our micro-weaknesses, or we leverage our foundational stats and jump to a brand new S-curve to reignite rapid growth and evade burnout entirely.
And the mortar holding every single brick of this project together.
Right.
We track our success not by agonizing over the lag measures, the distant results we cannot control, but by obsessively, relentlessly executing our lead measures, the daily inputs over which we have absolute total power.
It is a comprehensive, remarkably resilient framework for actualizing potential.
It truly is.
But we are not going to leave you with mere theory today. The material ended with a direct challenge, and we are passing that exact 30-day challenge directly on to you, the listener. We are asking you to transition from the blueprint phase to the construction phase today.
Yes. Look at the 3 pillars we dissected: vocation, network, and vitality. We want you to select just one. Do not succumb to the temptation to overhaul your entire life simultaneously that guarantees failure.
Take the single pillar that is currently the most unstable or requires the most urgent attention.
For that single pillar, define one specific lead measure that you will commit to tracking for the next 30 days. Make it entirely within your control.
If you pick vocation, your lead measure might be exactly what the text suggested. I will dedicate 45 minutes of focused, deep work to my primary project before checking a single email each workday.
It is binary. You either did it or you didn't.
Write it on a physical piece of paper. Tape it to your bathroom mirror. Track that single input for a month and watch the corresponding reality begin to shift around you.
But before we conclude, as we stand back and survey this magnificent, highly optimized superstructure we have spent the last hour designing, there is a final, lingering thought I want you to consider.
Okay, what is it?
It is not explicitly answered in the text, but it is the natural, inevitable consequence of everything we have discussed.
What is the blind spot here?
We have spent this entire deep dive discussing the mechanics of building, but the fundamental law of the universe is entropy. Architectures age, materials weather. More importantly, your internal needs, your foundational blueprint will radically evolve over the next decade.
That's very true.
The person you are today is not the person who will inhabit the structure in 10 years. So as you execute this 30-day challenge, as you construct this beautiful, efficient, resilient life, you must ask yourself this.
I'm listening.
Will there come a day when this beautifully constructed superstructure no longer serves the person you have become?
Oh.
And when that day inevitably arrives, will you become a prisoner of your own perfect architecture, or will you possess the courage to tear it down and build again?
That is a profoundly heavy question to carry with you. Building the structure requires discipline, but tearing down what you successfully built just to make room for something truer, that requires a completely different echelon of bravery.
It really does.
Thank you so much for bringing such incredibly rich, demanding material to the table today. We love taking these deep dives with you, dissecting the blueprints, and helping you pour the concrete. Take that 30-day challenge, pick your pillar, define your lead measure, manage your energy, and above all else, keep learning. We'll see you next time.